Yeah, so I am Myra. I work at Deltaris in Delft. And one of the main questions we had within the CleanSea project was, once plastics enter into the marine environment, what happens to them? We know that they break down into smaller pieces, but this process has not yet been very well studied. So we decided to do an experiment. We went outside to the North Sea and collected about 350 liters of North Sea water containing microorganisms, and we put that into this big tank in one of our laboratories. And then we started building our own artificial plastic soup. So we put some balloons in there, some plastic cups, but also the more compostable plastics. And the question was, what would happen to these plastics over time as we expose them to mechanical stresses, but also UV light to simulate the conditions in the field? And this is actually what happens to a compostable trash bag. So at day 0, you can see that this is still something that you would happily put your trash in. But already after about 2 months, small holes start to appear. And after 183 days, it would be very unwise to put your trash in this bag. So this breakdown is a result of 2 processes. On the one hand, you have fragmentation, which is caused by the mechanical stress, which is pieces breaking into smaller pieces. And on the other hand, you have these microorganisms that actually degrade the plastics into smaller elements. If we then further try to quantify this, we looked at weight loss of plastics. So what you can see here is a graph with all the with our artificial plastic soup on the x-axis. So you see the different kinds of plastics that we used in the experiment. And on the y-axis, you see the percentage of weight loss per year. So we also have different categories of plastics. You see the green bars, which represent the more bio-based plastics, and then you have the red bars, which are the plastics that have a very strong carbon skeleton, so the atoms are very strongly attached to each other. And then you have the blue bars, which have also a bit more traditional plastics, but with a slightly weaker atomical bond. And what you can see, if we go back to our compostable trash bag, is that it actually loses more than 25% of its original weight per year. And this is quite a lot, especially if you compare it to, for example, polystyrene packaging foam, which only loses about 2% of its original weight. And what this means, actually, this breakdown, is that probably there will be smaller particles being created. But these have not yet been measured. They're still waiting analysis in the project. And what we can learn from this graph is that plastics break down, but the rate at which they break down is different per type of plastic material. From Andy's talk, we've learned that microplastics can have an effect on marine organisms. And a very important marine organism is the algae. It's kind of the grass of the ocean, if you will. It not only forms the basis of the food chain, but it is also important for humans because it produces oxygen. Now, in CleanSea, we studied these algae. We exposed microalgae to high concentrations of microplastics of different sizes, and we actually found that there were effects on the production of these algae, and also that these effects were larger if the particles were smaller. Now, models are a way of understanding processes in the marine environment. With the algae, we did model runs based on the CleanSea experiment, but actually the model runs, they have resulted in the effect that microplastics effects on these algae were negligible. So we went one step higher in the food web. We looked at zooplankton. And zooplankton are very small invertebrates that are floating around freely in the upper water column and so can be seen from the surface. So what you see here is a model output of one of these runs. So we have here the North Sea, as you can hopefully recognize. So we are in Amsterdam, obviously, and this shows the impact that microplastics have on the zooplankton biomass and production. So it may be a bit counterintuitive, but actually here blue, the color blue, signifies a higher impact. So what you can see is that the areas that are mostly affected in terms of zooplankton by microplastics are the blue areas that are quite far off the coast. Now, what this means is that there is less food available for fish and other consumers that are feeding on the zooplankton. Now, future research will focus on what this actually means for the consumers higher up in the food chain, but also what this means for the ecosystem. And then I'd like to finalize with a few take-home messages. So the first thing is, okay, we have quantified, we've tried to quantify, and we're working to better understand how these plastics break down and what rate and what processes. And also, we've learned that this depends on the type of plastic material that you find in the environment. And then secondly, we've learned that microplastics may potentially affect the ecosystem, and especially on the basis of the food web. I'm going to give the floor now to Ghada, who will talk a bit more about another kind of model that we have used within the CleanSea project. Thank you.